everyone, thanks so much for joining me today. For today's video, I am creating a birthday card featuring the Lawn Fawn Be Happy stamp along with mini picture frames. I'm going to start by stamping all of the images onto a piece of Nina Solar white 80-pound cardstock. I am using my Misty to help me do this because some of the images I stamp out several times. Typically, I will stamp out a lot more images than I need since I am going to use my scan and cut to cut all of those images out, and it's just a little bit easier to cut that many out than just one or two. That way I have some for a later date. I'm using Memento ink to stamp these images out because it is a Copic friendly ink, and I'm going to be using my Copic markers to color in the images. Before I send my images through the scan and cut, I'm taking an EK Tools journaling pen and just drawing in some details to a couple of those peas. I wanted all of the images that I used to have arms and legs, so I'm just drawing that in with the pen. And then I wanted a couple of those peas to have a birthday cat hat, so I'm drawing that in as well. Next, I've sent the entire images through my scan and cut, and my scan and cut all of those pieces out for me. And I have to be honest, I love my scan and cut. I'll just go through and pop them all off the mat, and then I store them in with the stamp set, at least the ones that I don't use right now. I've left the coloring in because these are just tiny images, and so it doesn't take me very long, and I will only color one of those on screen. Typically, I do use between 4 and 5 markers per color blend, and that's because I get a better blend with that many markers without a whole lot of effort. This is just my own personal thing, and you do not have to use that many markers. I've seen people get really nice blends with just 2 markers. I do try to leave the caps out of the markers that I used, but I will have a list of all of the markers I used listed on my blog, which I will link to down below. Typically, I do go over my images twice, and for this particular one, I'm using the darkest markers in the bottom left corner, and then I blend out with the lighter markers all the way up to the lightest blend at the top of the right. And then when they're all done, I'm just stamping out the little faces that were part of the stamp. Next, I've arranged all of the components onto the card front, and then I can start working on the individual parts. The background that I plan to use, I'm taking a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock, and I'm ink blending worn lipstick Distress Oxide ink on top of that with my blender brush. To get a really nice blend, I just go back and forth, buffing out any harsh lines and fingerprints that I may leave behind. Once it's dry a little bit, I spritz some water, and then I can blot that up with a clean paper towel. I do let the water sit for a few moments, and then I can take a towel and wipe that off. Next, I'm going to create some splatters, and for that I'm going to start with my Copic opaque white ink. I'm just watering it down a little bit so that I can take my paintbrush and dab that in there, and then I can splatter it onto my background. And then I wanted some contrast to this, so I took some black acrylic ink, paint rather, and doing the same thing, I've watered it down just a little bit, and then I'm going to create some splatters with that black ink. And I think that black ink on top of the pink background is just really, it turned out really great. This is another piece of Bristol cardstock that I'm taking, and I'm smushing that worn lipstick onto my glass mat, and then I've watered it down and I'm splattering some of that worn lipstick onto the white background. Then I'll do the same thing. I'll go through and get a little more and get some of that black acrylic ink, paint rather. I'm not sure why I keep calling it ink. I know it's paint. And then I'm just going to create some of the black splatters to kind of tie into the pink panel that I've created earlier. Now I'm going to start die cutting all of my components and do all of that at once. I've got a piece of black cardstock. I believe this is Lawn Fawn black cardstock, and I've die cut all of the picture frames, and then I'm lining up those picture frames again onto the white splattered background that I've created. And I'm going to cut that, and then of course my pink background that I've created, I've die cut the panel using the largest Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to create with the black frames or the white frames, so I just kind of cut both, and in the end I decided I like the contrast between those colors, and so I chose black frames and then white, that white splattered background. I've also die cut several pieces of white cardstock from the picture frames, and I'm just adding those as a thickness to the back of the frames for a little bit of dimension. And I just stack up the white frames, and then on top of that I can add the black frame. And there's a little bit where you can see some of the white. I'm just taking a black marker and coloring in those spots. And honestly, I could have just cut a few more layers of black cardstock to save myself this step. But anyway, next I'm going to work on the sentiment, and I've got my piece of black cardstock treated with anti-static powder, and then I'm taking the Hap-pea birthday sentiment from the stamp set, and I'm stamping it using Versamark Embossing Ink, and then I can add some white embossing powder and heat set that in place. At this point I am ready to start adhering all of my elements to a card front. I've got an A2 size card base, and I'm taking the pink panel, and thankfully so, the end of this glue is coming. But I'm taking whatever is left in that glue and adding some of that liquid adhesive to the card panel. And then once I get that in place, I can start adhering the rest of the elements. I've kind of got them all arranged, and after I had just the 3 die cut, it seemed like that one corner was empty. I just didn't like the way I had laid it out. So I went back and die cut the oval frame, and it's gonna have 4 parts to it. So here I'm just adhering all of the components. I've got the background adhered, I've got the picture background adhered, and then on top of that I'm adhering the black frames. I took the sentiment and I trimmed it up using my paper trimmer so that it kind of fits in that small little space. The sentiment is popped up on some foam tape, and then I can adhere that in place. I do go ahead and use my T-square ruler maybe, whatever that ruler is called, to kind of line it up straight and press it into place. And then the little peas, I've got those popped up on foam tape, and I can adhere those into those frames. That's it for my card today. Thanks so much for stopping by, and I will see you next time.